You know, when the crowd's smaller, then our voice, each individual voice means a little bit more, right? So you might actually hear my voice, which is probably not a good thing. But welcome to 2022. Wow. Amazing that it's 2022. Are you excited about 2022? You know, maybe you're more like, boy, I'm glad 2021 is over. Then I'm looking forward to 2022, but maybe you're looking forward to 2022. I hope so. Hey, it's already off to a great start. I mean, we get to see Carson, right? I mean, it's been a while since we've seen him, so it's great to have him here. So a new year, you know, this is a time when a lot of people, they make their New Year's resolutions. And, you know, I was just reading some about, you know, some of the top resolutions. You know, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to get a better job. I'm going to, you know, do better with my finances. A lot of the common things that people have. And then, you know, unfortunately, a lot of times a few days later or a month later, you know, it's like, what happened to that goal or that resolution that I set? I don't know if you're the kind of person that sets, you know, New Year's resolutions or New Year's goals. If you do, that's great. If you don't, that's great. Romans 14 and verse 5, Paul says, one man considers one day more sacred than another. Another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. He who regards one day as special does so to the Lord. So if we're going to regard this year as special, let's make it to the Lord. If we're going to regard it as just another day, let's just, you know, make the best of it and regard it as to the Lord. You know, that doesn't really matter. You know, I kind of look at it like God gives us the opportunity to start over all the time. He gives us a new year. So, yeah, I like the fact that I've got a new year and I can, you know, look forward to a new year. And he really does that with every month. We've got a new month. And then, you know, every week, you know, this is a new week. We're starting a new week today, okay? First day of the week. If you had a bad week last week, hey, that week is in the past. You can start a new week this week. And then every day is a new day. You know, I don't know the exact reference. As one of the Psalms says, this is a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. If you had a bad day yesterday, hey, you got a new day. You can start a new day. And you know what's amazing is even in the middle of the day, we can start new. Isn't that amazing? Because of what Jerome talked about a little bit earlier, Jesus dying on the cross for us. Just to give you a little background to this message, I was originally supposed to preach on the 16th, and Dan was going to preach today. So I didn't really have a message prepared for the first Sunday of the year message or a New Year message or anything like that. I was going to preach out of Ezekiel 33, actually, is what I'd already started thinking about in my mind. But as I thought about it more, it's like, hey, that message will fit today as well. The title of the message is We Are Responsible. We are responsible. You are responsible. I am responsible. Look over in Ezekiel 33. Just to give you a little bit of background of Ezekiel, I've been reading through Ezekiel. Ezekiel can be a challenging book to read through. I mean, sometimes it's just confusing. You know, you may remember out of the book of Ezekiel, maybe you remember Ezekiel chapter 1 through 3, where Ezekiel sees this incredible vision and God makes him a watchman and basically tells him, hey, you're responsible to get my message out to the people. Maybe you remember chapter 18 where God goes through this scenario of each person's responsible for their own sin, and he kind of goes through, you know, 3 generations, a father, a son, and then a grandson. Maybe you remember Ezekiel 37. Wow, I mean, a valley of dry bones. And God brings those dry bones to life to create a vast army. You probably don't remember much other than those out of Ezekiel. Maybe there's a few other things that you remember out of Ezekiel. It's probably not a book that we reference a lot or use a lot. But there's some powerful things in the book of Ezekiel. Just to give you a little bit of background of the time, in 597 BC, there was a group of people, including Ezekiel. This was the second exile of the Israelites, of the Jews from Jerusalem. The second exile. Babylon came in and they fought against the city of Jerusalem. They didn't totally destroy it. They took some exiles, and Ezekiel was one of the exiles taken. And then in 586 BC, they came back and they totally destroyed the city of Jerusalem. And Ezekiel is called by God. He's in a group of these exiles that came in 597 BC. He's called by God to be their prophet. And this time is a time of incredible turmoil. I mean, imagine being exiled and away from your homeland and around new customs and new people and a new way of doing things, and what you've known for years has dramatically changed. And yet much of what God spoke through Ezekiel was, hey, you are responsible. You're responsible. Look in chapter 33 and verse 12. He didn't tell them they were, well, he did to some degree tell them they were responsible for what had gone on, but he talks to them a lot about their personal responsibility. In Ezekiel 33 and verse 12, I'll back up reading verse 11. And this is God telling Ezekiel basically what to say to the people. Say to them, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn and live. Turn from their evil ways and live. Turn from your evil ways. Why will you die, O house of Israel? Therefore, Son of Man, say to your countrymen, the righteousness of the righteous man will not save him when he disobeys, and the wickedness of the wicked man will not cause him to fall when he turns from it. The righteous man, if he sins, will not be allowed to live because of his former righteousness. If I tell a righteous man that he will surely live, but then he trusts in his righteousness and does evil, none of the righteous things he has done will be remembered. He will die for the evil he has done. And if I say to the wicked man, you will surely die, but he then turns away from his sin and does what is just and right, if he gives back what he took in pledge for a loan, returns what he has stolen, follows the decrees that give life, and does no evil, he will surely live, he will not die. None of the sins he has committed will be remembered against him. He has done what is just and right, he will surely live. Yet your countrymen say the way of the Lord is not just, but it is their way that is not just. If a righteous man turns from his righteousness and does evil, he will die for it. And if a wicked man turns from his wickedness and does what is just and right, he will live by doing so. Yet, O house of Israel, you say, the way of the Lord is not just, but I will judge each of you according to your own ways. You know, my first point is we are responsible for our own spiritual condition. You are responsible for your spiritual condition. I'm responsible for my spiritual condition. You know, back up in verse 5, God tells Ezekiel, hey, if you appoint someone to blow the trumpet and he doesn't blow the trumpet, he's responsible. But if he blows the trumpet and you don't follow the warning, then you are responsible. Ezekiel is the watchman. He is the prophet. He's the one to preach the word to the people. How responsible are we? How many sermons have you heard? How many times have you read the Bible? You know, we've read the Bible. We've heard thousands of sermons. You know, most of us in here, we've been disciples for a while. I've been a disciple almost 40 years. Al and I will both celebrate our 40th year of being a disciple this year. He's only 21. Wow, I don't have any excuse. Al doesn't have any excuse. You don't have any excuse. We've heard so much. We've heard so much of God's word. We're responsible for our own relationship with God. You know, in chapter 18, I mentioned this chapter. You're probably familiar with this. In verse 1, the word of the Lord came to me. What do you people mean by quoting this proverb about the land of Israel? The fathers eat sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, you will no longer quote this proverb in Israel. For every living soul belongs to me, the Father as well as the Son. Both alike belong to me. The soul who sins is the one who will die. So God says, hey, what are you guys doing quoting this proverb? Basically blaming your parents. And then he goes to this scenario of having a father and his son is not the same, and then that son is not the same. I don't remember the order here. The conclusion is down in verse 20. The soul who sins is the one who will die. The son will not share the guilt of the father, nor will the father share the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous man will be credited to him, and the wickedness of the wicked will be charged against him. We're responsible. We're all responsible. You know, we are in a society where we like to shift the blame, and we like to blame other people. You know, we like to blame our parents. If it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't be this way. Maybe you have kids. They start, that gets turned around. They start blaming their problems on you. You know, we want to blame our situation. You know, they had a horrible situation back then. Ezekiel saying, no, you can't blame it. You've got to take responsibility for where you're at spiritually. You know, we could say, I'd have had a better year in 2021 if it wasn't, for this virus, or if it wasn't for the economy, if it wasn't for, the way this person treated me. I would have had a better year. Hey, maybe you would have had a better year, but I'm talking about our spiritual condition, our relationship with God, where we're at with God. It's our responsibility. It doesn't matter if your spouse or friends or kids, it doesn't really matter what they do. Did God this year say, I don't really want to be close to you? I don't think he did that. He was there with his hand. One of my favorite verses is in James, come near to God and he'll come near to you. It's kind of like always our move. It's up to us how close we want to get to God. It doesn't matter about the circumstances, but yet it would be really easy for us to blame the circumstances. It'd be really easy for us to look to the future this year and I hope things get better this year. I don't really have anything to do with how I do. It's all, if things get better, I'll do better. I'll have a better year. No. Take responsibility. Things don't really start to change. And let me back up a second. I'm not saying that we have control over all these things. Matter of fact, I think we are kind of learning that we don't really have much control at all. But we do still have a control of our heart and our attitude and our relationship with God. That's one thing that we have control over. And we don't have control over the economy. We don't have control over what way the society goes. We don't have control over a virus. We don't really have control. We've got to vote. We don't necessarily have a control over what our government's going to do about things. We don't have that much control. And none of us should take responsibility for those things. I'm not saying take responsibility for something that is outside of your control, but your relationship with God is not within anybody else's control. That's totally and completely within your control. You can control that. And it really, in life, really, you don't really start making progress. If you're blaming everybody or blaming situations and things like that, you're not really going to make any progress. If I'm blaming you because I'm not doing good in something, then I'm really relying on you to make things better for me. And you may or may not make things better for me. But if I take responsibility, then I can start making some progress. And so I think that is a great thing this year. Hey, I could take responsibility for me, for how I'm doing with God, and I can start making some progress. And maybe you're doing great with God, and you can make more progress. Maybe you're struggling right now, and you can start making some progress. But we've got to, first of all, take responsibility. You know, back this story that I read in Ezekiel is interesting because I don't know that we think that way. You know, he basically tells Ezekiel, hey, if somebody's been living righteous and then they turn away and they stop living righteous and start sinning, basically, they're not going to be saved. And he says, hey, if somebody's lived a long life of evil, but they turn to God, then they are going to be saved. And in our mind and in the way we've been trained, I don't know that we think like that. I mean, what are we taught when we're young? Hey, you know, you work really hard and then you can get a break. You know, we're taught to, you know, your career. You know, you work hard in your career and you save up money and then you can retire. That's kind of the way our society works. My brother retired this year, and he's a hard worker, and he worked hard. He worked the same job about 35 years. He retired like a week before he turned 62. And, hey, good for him, but that can kind of enter, I think, our mindset spiritually. I've done all these things. I've served God for a long time. Our destiny has not been determined. Let that sink in for a moment. Look around. I mean, I've been a disciple almost 40 years. I could still turn away and leave. I could still give in. I'm tempted to sin. I've struggled. I could still leave God. It's not a foregone conclusion that I'm going to make it to the end of the race. It's really not. Now, that's what I want to do, and that's what I'm determined to do, but I've got to do it. And the same is for you, and the same is for your brothers and sisters. Their final destiny has not been determined yet. You know, I do believe that we need to be secure in our salvation, but that doesn't mean that we can't fall. And I think it's just kind of sobering to, hey, I've got to keep running this race. This Christian life is a race. And if I'm not running the race, I need to start running the race. You know, I think the thing, what's mentioned there in chapter 33, you know, there's a double-edged sword. There's a good side and there's a bad side. You know, I guess we could look at the bad side of being, you know, wow, I've got to keep doing this, you know. I've got to keep following. I can't, there's a chance that I could fall, you know, down the road. The good side is, though, that, hey, I can change. I can change. My destination, my impact, my life has not been determined yet. Look over at chapter 36. You know, and I appreciate Jerome's message there in the communion. You know, I thought it was interesting that he really tied Jesus' death and his sacrifice to us getting to heaven. Because that's, you know, the ultimate goal. You know, let's finish the race. Here in Ezekiel 36, let's see, we're going to start reading in verse 24. Now, here's the thing, and I'm talking a lot about us personally, and it's your responsibility and things like that. I'm not, you know, trying to negate it all. You know, certainly what Al talked about was great, you know, love. We need to love each other. I mean, part of our, you know, having a great relationship with God is letting what God does in our lives flow out to help other people. You know, Parker had a message a few weeks ago or maybe a month ago that talked about all the one another passages in the Bible. So I'm not saying that you're an island, but what I think the scriptures teach is that, we are responsible for our relationship with God and where we're at with God. And, we are responsible for how we let God use our lives. It's interesting that, when I was looking through some things about some resolutions that people make, I didn't really see anything in there about God. And that's, a lot of people make their resolutions, and hey, sometimes people stick to them and they make big changes. Most of the time they don't. But I think God needs to be involved in any plan or goal that we might have for 2022. God has a plan for us. And if we can align our plan with God's plan, then hey, that's a great plan. That's really going to work. But if we just have our own plan, at some point, it's probably going to fail. But God can help us. He can help us to get to our destiny. We can't do it on our own. Here's what we all need. If we want this to be a new year, this is what we need here. God tells Ezekiel, "For I will take you out of the nations. I'll gather you from all the countries and bring you back into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you'll be clean. I'll cleanse you from all your impurities and all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. I'll put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws." More than anything this year, we need a new heart and a new spirit, don't we? Man, that's what we need. We need a new heart. Man, a great heart that loves God and loves other people, a great spirit, a great attitude. We need God's spirit. We've got God's spirit within us. We need to follow God's spirit. That's what we need. I don't think it's a coincidence that the next chapter 37, and we're not going to read through this. I hate that we're not reading it. It's an amazing chapter. I mean, it's dramatic. It's powerful. But God takes Ezekiel over a valley, and there's a bunch of dry bones. The people had died. They had decomposed. Their bones are dry, separated down on this valley. And he asked Ezekiel, "Can these bones live?" And Ezekiel was probably kind of wise. He said, "Well, only you know, God." And then he tells Ezekiel to prophesy, to preach. And these bones start coming together, and they form a skeleton. And then flesh comes on them. And then God breathes life into them. And he says they stood on their feet, a vast army. And, we could look at that as our individual lives, regardless of how dead we might think we are, or dead we feel spiritually. God can raise us to life. We could think of that as our church. How small maybe we can be, but God can if he can raise a vast army out of dry bones, he can do that with us here in Knoxville. But anyway, I'm not going to read that chapter. You can read that yourself. But our destiny has not been determined yet. And I think that's a good thing. I'm glad that I can change. I'm glad that there's things I can still look forward to and things that I can do. And I'm glad that God still wants to use me. Look in chapter 22 of Ezekiel. The last point is one person can have a big impact. Ezekiel 22 and verse 30. I looked for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land so that I would not have to destroy it, but I found none. So basically, God is saying, hey, if there would have been, one person, maybe one person that would have really been committed to doing my will, I would not have had to destroy Jerusalem. I mean, we've seen this play out before. God has used one person to save the whole nation before. He did it with Noah. And then he chose Abraham to basically start his family and to start his kingdom. He raised up David. He used a teenage girl, Esther, to save the whole nation of Jews. It's amazing what God can do with one person. It's amazing what God could do with you and me. I asked Bill this coming in, and I don't remember the names of the people, but tell me again, Bill, who reached out to you and Lisa? Okay, so these guys, when they reached out to Bill and Lisa, they were just being good disciples, right? I'm sure they didn't realize the impact they were going to have. They were going to help this couple become disciples. This couple was going to help a lot of other people. This couple was going to have 4 kids. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to add another one there. This couple, they didn't realize this couple was going to really, like having kids, Have 4 kids. All of these kids grow up and become disciples. A couple of them get married, already having other kids. They didn't realize the impact they were going to have. But just their small act of being willing to stand in the gap back then has had a tremendous impact. And we can think of the people that reached out to us. We can think of people that we've reached out to. We can think of the people that God has used us to encourage, or the people that have encouraged us, that kind of kept us going. God can do a lot with one person. He can do a lot with you. God wants you and I to stand in the gap this year. What gap are we going to stand in? Who are we going to stand in the gap for? Our family? Maybe our neighbors? Maybe people we work with? Each other, hopefully. We'll stand in the gap for each other and help each other. Maybe somebody random that you don't even know. God can use us to have a tremendous impact if we take responsibility. If we take responsibility for where we're at spiritually and our spiritual destiny, then God can use us to have a big impact. This chapter, I mentioned to Al I was going to be preaching from this chapter, and he shared with me, he's already shared with me this before, but basically he's used this concept that God talks about Ezekiel being a watchman. That's basically his responsibility to teach. And it's not his responsibility of how people respond. It's just his responsibility. If God gives him an opportunity to share with someone or to teach someone, then that's his responsibility. And if he does that, God will take care of the rest. And Al it's inspiring to me to hear about people Al's reached out to through his job and, of course, his family and things like that. That's him taking responsibility for his relationship with God and the role that God has given him, and even, the people around him. I want to encourage us to take responsibility for where you're at spiritually. It might be good, might not be good. But you know what? Even if it's not good, even if you say, man, I'm not really doing that well spiritually, hey, the great thing is God can give you a new heart. You can pray to God for a new heart. He can give you a new heart and a new spirit. Take responsibility for the new chapter that you'll write this year. I do some things that are interesting. My memory's not as good as it used to be, so I don't know, a few years ago, I decided I need to write down some things that have happened in my life and some things that I've done and accomplished. I need to write that down so I don't forget about them, And so I started, every year I'm alive, and I wrote down, something significant that either happened or that I did or I accomplished or whatever. And some years are blank. I don't really have anything there. But some years have several things in there. And, you kind of look at every year that, hey, I've got a new year to live, a new chapter, let's see what's going to happen this year. And, hey, we're not going to be able to control everything that's going to happen. A lot of disastrous things may happen this year. We may have, a lot of great things that happen this year. But, what are we going to do? What are we going to write? We can determine how our year goes, even if everything doesn't go right around us. We can determine how well our year goes with our relationship with God. And then lastly, let God use you this year to have an impact. I think, imagine if each one of us, there's not that many of us, but imagine if each one of us just took responsibility for our relationship with God, and we grew in our relationship with God, and we took responsibility for our destiny and what we're going to see God do in our lives, and we took responsibility for standing in the gap and being that person that God can use. Imagine what could happen if just us. Well, there's about 15 of us in here, and then another group online. If we all did that, imagine the impact that we could have for God. Amen.